Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, greetings everybody. This is my first teaching over Zoom. A little bit different from normal, that you just speaking to a screen and seeing yourself on the screen. But I'm sure I'll get used to it. I think there's more of this teachings over the Zoom is happening, and it is a very good source of teaching the Dhamma to people opportunities to listen to Dhamma at this time when there's a lot of restrictions in terms of movement and visiting teachers or going to monasteries. And at this unusual time, makes me really appreciate the Buddha's teachings, because it really helps one to deal with it and cope with it in a way without say being a cause of too much suffering. So whenever these sort of situations arise, one can bring the Dhamma to mind. The Dhamma, of course, is, like the Buddha said, the medicine that can cure our mental ills. And just the importance of using our wisdom and the Buddha's, one of the things we've learned from the Buddha to contemplate the situations in life that we find ourselves in, whether they be favourable, unfavourable, wanted, not wanted. So I retired last November from being the abbot of Chithurst Buddhist Monastery. My determined 5 years of office finished, and I didn't apply for an extension. After my 5 years were over, it's a tradition that the old abbot goes away for a year to let the new abbot settle in. So I had this wonderful year planned, a nice sabbatical year. And I had quite a few invitations to visit our different monasteries around the world. So I had this lovely sort of schedule planned. So I started off at a monastery in Thailand, and then spent a few months in Thailand, and then came to Australia, where I was planning to spend another couple of months before going on to New Zealand, Japan and Canada. But the coronavirus came in, and I got locked down here in Melbourne and didn't make it to New Zealand, Japan or Canada. So it only goes to show that whatever plans one makes, whatever routines one has, that you're involved in in a world of cause and effect. And this is what the Buddha encourages us to consider, like the law of karma, you can say, in terms of right understanding and wisdom. The Buddha asked us to reflect on the law of karma. And so when I do plan these trips, I do also consider, okay, I'll make this plan, but it depends on causes and conditions around whether they happen or not. Because, really, we're not in control of this life. We're not like some super being. We have to, adapt to the conditions. And, if one reflects like that, then if plans work out, fine. And if they don't work out, one can adapt. One doesn't have a lot of suffering about it. But, in this modern day world with technology, we do tend to sometimes get under the illusion that we're in control of everything, because we can control many things with technology. And also, things become quick and efficient. And, we can sort of expect things to go according to our wishes. And of course, when things don't go according to our wishes, when we think they should, then we suffer. But if we do reflect on, we are involved in this law of karma, and things are subject to causes and conditions, then when things do, say, change, and we can't fulfill our plans, then, if we're wise, we can peacefully adapt. And if we can't adapt, then the suffering. Yeah? And I just remember an occasion. I was travelling from the north of England down to Chithurst Monastery in the south, and I have to pass through London and get a connecting train from Waterloo Station to Petersfield, which is near the monastery. And I arrive on Waterloo Station and everything's been delayed. There's been problems with the signals, and the trains have been delayed by what they thought would be at least 1 hour. So it's a bit disappointing, being stuck on Waterloo Station at rush hour. It's like about 5 o'clock in the afternoon and people are coming out of work, the busiest time. But, do I reflect is okay, just stand there, breathe in and out and wait for the train. So I was stood on the platform, adapting to the new conditions. And then this gentleman comes up to me, and he's sort of businessman, briefcase, suit and tie. And he's really angry. And he says to me, "You might be at peace with this, but I want to strangle somebody." You see, the expectation for everything to be on time and to go according to his wishes, and the suffering when they don't. So this is foolishness, isn't it, really? Rather than, just being a bit patient while the train comes. And that's another thing, isn't it, with efficiency and things. People can be very impatient these days. So this is just an example of, the suffering when things don't go according to our wishes. And if we're not willing to adapt. So I've had a few adventures on my travels around and things happening. Another occasion, I have a relative up in the north of England who's not very well that I visit from time to time, a sister. And she lives in a care home in, outside of Manchester. And when I go and visit, I stay with a friend in the south of Manchester. And somebody buys me a tram ticket. So I go on the tram from the south of Manchester to not far from my sister's home, and then so I can get there fairly easily. So again, coming back from visiting my sister, this is October time, 5 or 6 o'clock at night in the evening. And the tram arrives in the north of Manchester, and there's a problem again, signal problem. So there's no trams across Manchester. So the announcement is, well, you'll have to get a bus, or you can share taxis together. Now, of course, for me, this doesn't really help because I don't have any money to catch a bus or pay for taxis. So my only alternative is to walk. And it's a cold evening, I'm just in my robes. But, this is it. This is, what you have to do. So I walked across Manchester to another station where I could get a tram to where I was going. And again, there was a lot of suffering around it, a bit cold. But the Buddha's teachings there, things change. One has to adapt. So that's a choice we have, isn't it? We adapt, peacefully adapt or suffer. So I hope, with the changes that have occurred in our lives due to this pandemic, that we've been able to cope with that and adapt to things in a fairly peaceful way. I must say it was quite easy for me to adapt because, Bodhivana Monastery is a very nice monastery. I have a very beautiful kuti in the forest there. So I must admit, it's not been a big challenge for me to adapt. But it would have been, really nice to visit my fellow monks in the different monasteries and people I know in especially like New Zealand. I spent 4 years there. But this time it's just not possible. So these are sort of themes come to mind, isn't it? About karma, about things change. These are all things the Buddha asked us to reflect on. And, the suffering, through not being able to adapt to change, to our desire for things to be different, for the situation to be different. So this is, we contemplate the Four Noble Truths. Yeah? If we're suffering in this situation, why? Yeah. Anyway, if we do see the causes, then the suffering lessens and we can adapt. So, contemplating our life. And another thing, we can't plan is the mind. Wouldn't it be nice? Okay, I want to plan my mind for tomorrow. So I'll wake up, bliss when I wake up. 8 o'clock, I'll have metta for 2 hours. 10 o'clock till 2 o'clock, I'll have karuna. 2 o'clock till 6, I'll have mudita. And I'll finish the day with upekkha. Wouldn't it be nice if we could plan the mind like that? Huh? But of course, we can't, can we? So, this is why the Buddha encouraged to contemplate mind as not actually something that belongs to us, and not something that we can own or control, but something that happens according to causes and conditions. But again, we can learn how to look after the mind. There's things we can do to be more at peace with, the changing conditions of the mind that come up in the different situations we find ourselves in. And this is, the benefits that come from, meditation. Cultivating the skill of being awake, aware of the mind. And this is, something the Buddha very much encouraged us to cultivate awareness, cultivate mindfulness, and wisdom in the ways we relate to whatever comes up in the mind. So in the guided meditation, I'll just talk a little bit about just cultivating this awareness in a way just to more cultivate a sense of peacefully being aware of whatever is coming up in the present moment. So we can't say stop certain reactions or unskillful mind states arising due to certain conditions. But what we can do is to be more aware of these things as they arise and not keep them going. Learn the skill of letting go of them. And before we came to practice the Dhamma through our karma, for one thing. Again, karma of the mind, our upbringing, our conditioning, and the certain habits we've created in the mind before we came to Dhamma practice. So there are things that are going to arise. But, we don't have to be stuck in them. We don't have to be overwhelmed by them. You say we could rise above them. And Luang Por Chah, said about meditation, it's tuning in with the higher mind, that awareness. So Buddhism is a very, I find very wise teaching, because it's not saying we should be idealistic about the mind. We should always be feeling kindness or compassion. But be willing, just observe however the mind is, to know it for what it is. And through mindfulness and wisdom, we can learn to experience, unpleasant, unskillful mind states, but without acting on them, speaking on them. Or, over-proliferating around them, that tends to keep that particular habit going, particularly, certain habits of thought. And I find, if we're not idealistic about how the mind should be, it is supportive of being more able to more peacefully observe. Even, the mind states that we don't particularly want. So this is our karma, we have to experience our karma. But again, mind states change, and how to allow things to change, allow unskillful things to go to cessation. And noticing, how the suffering is when we don't want these mind states, when we want to get rid, when we want to get rid of a mind state, when we want to get rid of thoughts, rather than just staying with awareness of them, allowing them to arise and cease according to conditions, according to karma. There is a story in the suttas. Actually, Venerable Dhamma Thakur reminded me about this story yesterday, and it's a story about, I think, related to. It's a symbolic story about, the way I look at it, about relating to the mind. And it's a story the Buddha told, and the occasion was in one of the heavenly realms, where Sakka is the king of the gods. And, he has a nice palace and he has a nice throne. Anyway, one day, a demon called a yaka came into the palace, little yaka, and climbed up onto Sakka's throne. Now, well, Sakka was out. Now, Sakka's followers got really upset. They got really angry with the yaka. How dare you get up onto Sakka's throne? Get off, go away. How dare you? And, and abused the yaka. But strange things happened. As people abused the yaka, it got bigger, and got bigger, till it filled the whole throne. Fortunately, Sakka returned, and Sakka, he was, praised by the Buddha for his wisdom, his skillfulness and his wisdom. So he comes in, and he figures out the situation. So he goes up to the yaka on his throne, his big yaka. He kneels down and said, "I am Sakka, king of the gods. Welcome to my palace." And he started treating the yaka in a very friendly way. And as Sakka spoke in friendly terms to the yaka, it got smaller, it got smaller, it got smaller, till eventually it just got off the throne and went away. And I see this like a symbolic story of how we relate to the mind. You know, if we try to get rid of things, or we don't have a skillful way of relating to them, then these problems they escalate, they get bigger. And then they can take us over. But if we learn to relate to the mind with mindfulness and wisdom, then over time these habits, they can get less strong, less frequent. And we can develop more the skill of letting them go. So you can say whatever we're experiencing in the present moment is okay. But, if it's something unskillful, then developing the skill of not keeping it going, of skill of letting go. Now, in this meditation, I was, bringing awareness into the physical body as a way of keeping us more in the present moment. And you see that a lot of the habits of mind always take us off into time. Worries, anxieties, these are habits of mind that are quite prominent these days. Of course, a lot of worries about the future and the pandemic and how things are going to be. But the thing is about, some of these mind states, they always tend to think in terms of all the worst things that could happen. So it doesn't really lead to any sense of well-being. So through awareness, being aware of some of these mind states and being aware of the thought patterns that manifest. But coming back to the present moment, coming back to the physical body to keep us more grounded. And if we develop this skill, we get more, we get more, good at it. Yeah? At first, the habits of mind are quite strong, and we tend to get caught. But over practice, we can learn more to come back to the present moment, come back to the body. And this is not just doing sitting meditation, but it also just doing something physical, just something to bring us away from the thought patterns that really just tend to keep these mind states going. Now, it's not saying sometimes we have to consider the future, but not to be addicted to time, because there's no peace and wisdom will arise in the mind if we're lost in time always. So, skillful means to bring us back to the present moment, to bring us away from, unhelpful thought patterns. So just something like, anxiety, it's a common thing. And, I've certainly experienced a lot of anxiety over my years of practice, but I've more learned just to be with it. Especially in the body, the feeling in the stomach, breathing in and out, feeling the anxiety, bringing the mind away from the tendency to over-proliferate about the future and what might happen. Like giving a talk. Oh, I might be, people might not like it. People might walk out. The mind can always, think about, things that, project things that, may not happen. I've just used a very simple exercise, breathing in and out and feeling the body and the anxiety in the stomach. And sometimes with the thoughts, as I breathe in, may I be well? Breathing out, may I be free from anxiety? Just keeping a more skillful thought in mind to replace the thoughts about the past and the future. Again, that does take practice to be able to have the mindfulness to do that. And initially, you bring that thought to mind, and the mind goes off into the future, then you bring it back to the breath, the body, the skillful contemplation. It goes off again, it come back. But if you keep at it, we get more skilled at it. And, this works very well with many sort of the more stronger mind states that we might experience. If we get angry, to do something physical can be very helpful instead of the anger coming out with some sort of unskillful bodily or verbal action. Go for a walk, do some walking meditation, go and do some gardening, go and wash the pots. Something physical, just to ground us again in the present moment. Again, mindfulness of the body I found a very helpful practice. And especially helpful in maybe some of the more difficult situations. So on one occasion, this is in the early days of Amaravati Monastery in England, we had a problem that there were these youths coming in, driving into the monastery at night and pushing over the Buddha Rupa in the courtyard of Amaravati. So we decided that every evening to have a couple of monks on the late shift in case these youths came in. So if they saw monks there, they'd probably hopefully just go away. So I was on this late shift one night with another monk, and the youths didn't come in that night, but we were in this sort of eating sala of Amaravati, and one of the guests came in to the sala about 11 o'clock at night, and he'd been out drinking. He wasn't really a practicing Buddhist, he was like a wayfarer who we used to accommodate for a short time from, and he was heading towards the kitchen to get some food, and of course in the monastery you're supposed to not have an evening meal. So he was coming back from the pub, heading to the kitchen, and he met up with another monk and myself. And the other monk admonished him, and he blew up. He got really angry, and he put his fists up. Now my response to that was fear, because potentially he was going to get violent. But the mindfulness came into the body to feel the fear and my legs were shaking. Yeah? And what came from that was I ended up just putting my hand on his fist and saying, "Please, no violence." And he calmed down. And, this is just an example of if we can stay in the body rather than going into the thoughts and the fearful thoughts of what might happen or do something silly. Just a moment just to ground yourself in the body, ground yourself in mindfulness, and then something more skillful can manifest. And, as a monk, traveling around, there's been quite a few occasions where I've had to use some of the things in terms of the way people sometimes respond. That's the only time I've ever been physically challenged, but of course, verbal things, sometimes people say not so nice things to us. So, if we do spend time cultivating this awareness, again using the body as a basis, it does strengthen our mindfulness and also our mindfulness of the mind. And this is why the Buddha did actually teach mindfulness of the body as the first foundation of mindfulness, as to initially strengthen the mind, and then to be more mindful of the mind states. So, this is the beauty of the Buddha's teachings, that relating to these habits with cultivating mindfulness and wisdom around them can help us to cultivate the ability to let go of them. And the other good news, the Buddha said that fundamental to the mind are more sort of bright states. We're not sort of say the more original mind is pure. Awareness itself has a purity and a radiance about it, but that purity and a radiance has just been covered over by these defilements, which we can develop the skill of abandoning. They're not who we are. There's no angry person, there's no anxious person. They're just conditions that arise and cease in the present moment. And the more we realize that, then the more freedom we have, the more peace we have in our life. And the ability to go beyond suffering. So at this challenging time, it's a blessing to have the Buddha's teachings. Again, the teachings on karma, the teachings on impermanence, the natural laws, the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, how to understand how the suffering arises. And again, I was particularly mentioning about the suffering that comes when we're too idealistic about how things should be, about how the mind should be, rather than just knowing the way it is. So I'd like to offer these thoughts. Maybe I've talked a bit long, but anyway, offer these thoughts for your consideration this morning or evening, wherever you are.